What's up, everybody? We are still in New York City in sub-zero temperatures. Ironically enough, every country we've shot in every season, even winter in Iceland, New York City now in March is officially the coldest location we've ever photographed anything in here in the entire Photographing the World series. But we're up here at the top of the rock. It's probably the most beautiful view of Manhattan itself. You can see every skyscraper infinitely in the distance, and today what I want to talk about is using a tilt shift lens. So we've already talked about this lens a little bit already. I've introduced it. It is the 19mm tilt shift lens by Nikon. I have it attached to my D810, and though we know kind of the basics of how it works already, now I want to put it into action and show you exactly how it benefits shooting situations just like this. If you make it to New York City, I highly recommend coming up here and shooting the view. There are actually 3 levels. There's one below me right here, there's one above that just back here, and I'm on the upper level. The special thing about the upper level here is there is no glass. You might see these glass panes here behind me right now. On the lower levels, those actually obstruct the view. But if you come to the top, all the way to the left-hand side, we have these nice little concrete pads here. And if you have a small tabletop tripod, you can set it up. I have the TF-801 by Really Right Stuff, but any small tripod will do, and they actually allow you to do this. You could even put your camera on a beanbag and get a really nice shot. So here, believe it or not, even though it's super windy, this little tripod is rock solid. Just like I was using it for the panos and the other locations we were shooting, it's perfect for setting up shots up here. Once you position yourself out here on this side, there are 2 sides of the city, so this shows Manhattan all the way down to the lower side, and if you turn around, you actually get Central Park and the upper side of Manhattan, Upper West, Upper East. So there are 2 beautiful views that you can shoot, and on both sides, you have these nice concrete pads where you can set up the tripod. So my recommendation, if you're gonna come up here though, come up here early enough that you can get one of these spots, because all the photographers who come up here know that this is the best place they can set up a little tripod. If you don't get one of these spots, you're going to get stuck trying to shoot things handheld, and it won't come out as good as if you have everything locked down on a tripod like this. Let's dive right into the lesson itself. I'm going to turn this camera into the video mode, and I'm going to record everything that I do so I can walk you through the setup and why I'm using this lens up here today. Right now my camera is in live view mode. Keep in mind that I am recording, so we're looking at a 16:9 aspect ratio, but you should get the point. So right now the camera's set up, I'm right here close to the edge, and I have a level horizon. The sky is really boring, that's not going to do, so anytime I have a really boring flat sky, I like to compose more of the foreground, or in this case more of the city, and keep out as much of the sky as possible. So I want 2/3 city and 1/3 sky. So if I move this forward and I start to tilt this down, the issue is, as I start to tilt down, you can see that I get this really infinite perspective view. So it looks like a vertigo view. And now, if I tilt down this far, leave a little strip of sky on the top, there is no way that I can correct my vertical lines. If I try to distort this to fix those edges and make them straight like we usually do in all the other shots, it's going to be massively distorted. All the squares are going to turn into rectangles with pulled edges. It's just going to look horrible. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to level this camera back out, and I'm going to show you guys how to use the shift feature on the lens itself to mitigate this effect. In other words, when I shift down, I'm not going to get the vertigo effect. My lines are not going to be distorted. They're going to be completely linear and parallel and perfect. So the first thing I need to do with this lens, I have to make sure that my horizon is perfectly level. So I'm going to reset that once more. All right, so that looks pretty good. And I'm using, you can't see it here, but what I'm doing is I'm using my in-camera level, so I'm making sure that that's perfect. Everything on the Nikon D810 is showing green, level horizon, level camera. Everything's perfect. So now that that's set up, this is again that flat, boring, centered horizon shot. But what I can do is I can just come over here on the right side of the lens in this case, and remember, that'll change positions as I rotate it, so it could be on the other side. You want to make sure that you're going to grab the shift function. And in this case, it's right down here. And watch what happens when I start to shift down. As I start to shift down, you can see that instead of what I had before of angling the camera down, as I start to shift down, my lines stay perfect. so I can have a deep perspective of the buildings themselves, maintaining all the lines perfectly vertical, perfectly straight, and I can adjust this so that the composition is exactly like I want it without having to worry about any distortion whatsoever. So the benefit is here. Even if we only rotated a scene down 20 or 25 degrees, think about it this way. When you start to change distortion, remove distortion, you might actually hurt the pixels. So if you think about having to stretch your image 20 or 30%, it's actually stretching the image and stretching the pixels out. Whereas this, since it's already perfectly parallel, the lines are perfect, as I shift down, you maintain the pristine quality of every pixel. So I will not have to do any adjustment in post as long as I set this camera up, leveled everything out, and then shifted it down. So it's a really cool effect. Now, if I had a great sky, what I could do as well is instead of shifting down, I could do the same thing and shift up, just like this. So if I had a crazy sunset going on, I could have a little bit of the buildings in the foreground on the bottom and take advantage of shifting up in the sky while maintaining perfect straight lines on all the buildings. That's the basics of how the shift feature on a tilt shift lens works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the shot exactly like I want it. I'm going to shift down, get everything set up. Another thing to point out, and I already mentioned this when we went over the lens itself, this is a manual focus lens, and I'm using a DSLR, meaning I don't have the focus peaking that I'm used to because I've been using my Fujifilm cameras for so long. I got a little spoiled knowing when everything's in focus. So once I get everything set up, I'm gonna do a couple tests. I'm gonna make sure I focus it to infinite. I'm gonna zoom in the live view, and I'm just gonna make sure everything's perfect before I commit to shooting. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and shoot the shifted version that I showed you guys with the perfect lines, and I'm also going to shoot a version that's more of a vertigo effect, and I'm going to show you what happens if we tried to correct something like that and why having a lens like this is so much better. We're just a few minutes away from the sunset, and just like I thought, the sky has turned completely blue. It's really boring, even though we had clouds earlier. Kind of fizzled out. So I'm really happy with my decision to have excluded as much of the sky as possible for this shot and really focused on the buildings. That being said, as the sun starts to go down, I'm going to get some nice soft golden light on the side of the buildings that'll look pretty nice. But unfortunately, down here on the bottom, in the middle of the city here, since I have so much of that in frame, I'm not getting a lot of that light. So what I really think is going to be great is a blue hour shot here. I'm really counting on a lot of the lights from the inner part of the city lighting up and illuminating this area. So right now I'm going to wait for those last rays of the sun, shoot everything that I need there, and then I'm going to wait up here, try not to freeze to death for the blue hour, and capture those shots as well. So I'm going to continue taking shots throughout the sunset and all the way through blue hour. We'll take those shots into post-processing and see which ones come out best. What's up, everybody? It's time to take a look at the images we captured from the top of the Rockefeller Center in New York City. Let's jump right into Lightroom and have a look. So this was the first time that I used a tilt shift lens, and you can see the result of that right here. And you can see it's a little underexposed. We'll take care of that in a minute. And what I tried to do when we were testing, just rotating the camera down, I wanted to keep the horizon pretty close to the same, and you can see I'm a little bit off, but it's pretty close. So the first thing I want to show you guys is this is what happens when you just rotate the camera down at 19mm. This is the same tilt shift lens, just locked to the dead center point and rotated down. Now this is the same lens shifted down. So you can see when we shifted down, our lines are almost perfect. Though you can see here on the edge, there's still a little bit off, so we're going to have to address that as well. First thing I want to do is show you the difference of what happens when we remove the distortion on the rotated down version. So without making any adjustments here, let's go ahead and slide down the panel a little bit. I just want to point something else out here. Now we have remove chromatic aberrations and enable profile corrections. If I go through the list and try to find this lens, you can see that I actually can't find the 19mm on here. It actually doesn't seem to exist. So you're going to find when you're using different tilt shift lenses, it's often that you can't find the make here. That's because it's hard for it to remove distortion when you're actually shifting or tilting, the amount of distortion, the amount of vignetting is going to change from lens to lens, so you're kind of on your own with that. We're going to leave that alone for now, and let's just go ahead and do our own upright transforms. And we have this really easy line to follow here. Let's go ahead and use that on the right side, here to here. Let's go ahead and use the corner of this building, or even this building over here. We can just grab the corner and go here to here. Now, you can see that that did remove the distortion, but you can see we have some issues here. Those big white lines, for one. And you can see that we're losing a lot of resolution. So in order to compensate for that, I'd actually have to go in and do some cropping here, just like this. And at that point, you can see that I kind of just end up with a square of an image. I'm still losing a lot. Now, my distortion reduction is not perfect. I'd have to go in and make some adjustments, which is fine. But basically, I just want you to see how much of the image we lose. And if you think about stretching this out, we're actually damaging these pixels underneath because we're actually stretching them. So a lot of these buildings, stretching them down here, it's going to pull the corners and make them a little bit more rectangular than actually linear and square. Now that's where this lens comes in, the tilt shift lens. When we shift down, we can shift it all the way down to its maximum, and we can still retain perfect straight edges. Now, saying that, I am observing that this is off just a little bit, so just to make it easier, let's go ahead and bring the exposure up temporarily, slide back down, and use the upright transformations. Now, before I do this, why is this off? Well, it's actually user error. I was up there using a little tiny tripod on top of a column in freezing weather. So I don't know, I might have just thought it was perfect. I was trusting the in-camera level, which we know is off by a few degrees, and I really didn't notice down here that it was off just a little bit. But a little bit is better than a lot, and something like this is really easy to correct. So let's go ahead and grab the inside edge here, right about here, and slide that down. Perfect, and we'll use the same angles that we used for the previous shot. It's already looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this because we have to make sure that it's really close, or as close as possible, because we need it to be accurate throughout. So this is going to have to move over just a little bit. This one down here is a little bit off. Let's go ahead and move it up right here. We'll kind of look at this edge. That edge looks really good. Let's go ahead and zoom back in over here. And it didn't zoom in on the left. We'll go ahead and pan over to fix that. Now we have to decide which edge of this building or this corner we want to use. I'm going to elect the outside edge, this right side, right around here. We'll just kind of check and take a look. Oh, that is really, really close. And that looks about perfect. We'll go ahead and turn this off, and we'll go ahead and zoom this back out. Since this is a Nikon lens, I'll remove the chromatic aberration. I'll leave the profile corrections as is. We'll go back up to the top and we'll zero this out. We're going to be using 3 images to blend. I have this very early daytime shot, very early blue hour, and a late blue hour. You can see the difference between those. First things first, I want to go ahead and copy these settings here. And remember, no tone. But we did change transform, lens correction. So copy, select both of these, right click, go up to develop settings, paste settings. Now, the frame that I want to start with as the base is this very early blue hour. You can see this is already one of the underexposed images, but the sky is very blown out. So let's go ahead and take care of that selectively. I'll just draw a tight gradient on the sky. Let's go ahead and pull the shadows back to 0 instead of their default. And let's go with the highlights. Let's pull those way down until we get that sky all the way back. I think we're going to have to go down to about 75. So negative 75. Might want to pull the shadows up just a little bit to compensate for the top of the building. That looks good. Stretch this out just a little bit. It would fade in. Perfect. Okay, next thing is this is super bright. I wonder if there's a way we can get rid of this. This is the early blue hour. You can see there are a few lights on in the city, but this sign is already really obnoxious. Let's see if there's a way that we can just get rid of that really quick. See how far we can take that. We'll leave the shadows down. Let's pull the highlights down. And, you know, it's helping, but I think those are pretty much destroyed. We'll have to take care of that using a different technique. The basic idea for the blend of this shot is I want to start really dark. So I'm going to start with the dark palette, darker buildings, darker sky, and then I'm going to layer up using the lighten blending mode and the highlights from the city itself. So I'm not going to make any adjustments to the exposure. We're going to keep this really dark, just the adjustments to the sky. Let's go ahead and right click, export, and since nothing has changed, export with previous. Let's head back to Lightroom. Now let's bring in our late blue hour. So this is almost perfect. You can see this is destroyed over here, but let's just go ahead and pull these highlights down just a little bit just to clean it up. I'm really looking at this area here and this area up on the buildings themselves. So just a 25 to 30 to 35% should do it right. Let's go ahead and export again with previous. I'm going to select all, Command A, copy, Command C, close, Command W, and paste. Command V. So we're going to call this one the adjusted blue hour. And we're going to call this the adjusted late blue hour. First thing, select this layer. We're going to go to the lighten blending mode and we're going to take a look at the difference. So here to here, you can see we're getting all of those lights. We're also picking up some of the highlights in the sky itself, but it seems like it's isolating the buildings pretty well, and that's because I kept it with a really dark palette on the sky and the building. So let's go ahead and soften this. Now I like everything it's doing here, not a fan of this or this area right here, and I feel like these colors on the top of the building are a little too vibrant and intense. So let's add a mask, click the new mask button, and we'll draw a gradient. So we'll say we want it to be about 100% opaque here, in other words 100% of the light here, and it's going to fade off to about here. That actually looks pretty good. Let's try that one more time. Let's actually make it a little bit more dramatic. From here to about here. All right, so that's softening everything on the horizon here, and that's also softening up the tops of the buildings. Now, if I look at this mask, you can see that we have pretty much a soft line here. So it's completely gone here, and I've purposefully drawn it from here to here, so we have a percentage of gray on this instead of full black, because I didn't want to black it out. Now, I could take this, unlink the mask, and scale it a little bit. So I could bring it down or up just to make minor adjustments. Or what I can do is go to the properties and change the density of the mask itself. So right now the mask is invisible. At 100% you can see it pop right back, so it'll be black and white. And I can actually pick a percentage in between until I like how much of that it's actually knocking out. So I'm going to pick about 75%, which looks pretty good. And we're just going to toggle this on and off. Now obviously I want the vibrancy here, I want the highlights, but I don't want them to be too intense. Now this has opacity associated with it here in the properties. So if I actually select this mask, paint, black, at full flow and opacity, you can see that it's never going to be more than 75% opaque. So if I want to knock things out of it, what I can do is just put this in a folder and add another control mask. And then with the brush tool, I can go in and sort of knock out these really obnoxious areas. Or even here, if this is a little bit too much, I can paint down some of these. So just kind of remove the very hot spots. Now, so far in the city, there's not too many of them. Even down here might be a little bit too intense. Anything that's just sort of a red flag of blown out highlights. Obviously, that is the worst one. H&M logo is not so bad. Some of these logos in the background, nothing's really that intense. So we just need to do a little bit. We'll call this highlights. Let's go back to Lightroom, and now we're going to bring in daytime exposure. Again, I'm not going to make too many changes. In fact, I'm going to make no changes to this, and I'm going to export it with previous. Select all, copy, close, and paste. So we'll call this late afternoon. Now, with this selected, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see it, and let's change it to the lighten blending mode. And you can see, ignore the sky, but take a look at what's happening in the city itself. So we're getting the highlights from the sky, and you can see we still have a lot of warm color from the sky, and we are getting highlights here, but this is going to give us those warm highlights back. It's also going to do two things down here. Pay attention to the shadows and the blues. It's going to neutralize that blue color. It's going to warm it up a little bit, not too much, and it's also going to bring some of those details back in the midtones and the shadows. That's why I started dark to begin with, because my plan was to create a mask here and just blend this in. So from white to black, we can say we want it here, to about here. Actually, let's do a little bit more, here to here. So we get some of those highlights. See the slight highlights there on the side? That looks pretty nice. We're getting some warm highlights from the sky, and we can just keep drawing that mask until we get it exactly how we like it. And I want some highlights and then disappearing on the horizon. Just like that. We'll try one more time. I think that's a little too intense. Turn this off and on. That looks really nice. I'm even picking up some of the smoke or the mist or the steam, whatever it is on the top of the building. That actually looks pretty nice. While we're at it, let's do one more thing. This drives me crazy, this completely blown out sign. Let's duplicate this really quick, and let's go ahead and delete the mask. We'll discard it. Let's turn it to normal. Well, let's take a look at this here. And you can see that's actually what the sign, during the day, that sign's on and it's almost too bright. So you can see from here to here is a big difference. So what I'm actually going to do, using this same layer, let's just go ahead and grab just a little bit, just this much. And let's use Command J to make a new layer via copy. Let's throw this away. And I'm just going to name this Sign Patch. And I'm going to toggle it on and off. So you can see even with that edge, that actually looks like it blends in pretty well. We're going to do one better, create a black mask, and we're just going to brush this in. So we're just going to go ahead and brush that sign back in and sort of adjoin some of the surrounding pixels here, just so it's less intense. I'll go ahead and zoom that out, and we'll take a look. Nice. Problem solved with the highlights. Well, now we're starting to get somewhere, but I'm really not happy with the sky. So if you think back to a previous lesson, like the Vision Tower from Dubai, I was able to stretch one sky out, one 50 megapixel sky, and use it for that pano. So what I'm wondering is, can we solve two scenes with the same sky? Well, let's find out. I'm going to go here. Now remember, inside of Lesson 10 Dubai Vision Tower Pano, there's that sky replacement layer. So if I just drag that to the Photoshop icon here, select all, copy, and we'll just go ahead and throw that on top here. You zoom out a little bit, you can see that the layer itself is a little bit larger. So this underlying image is shot with the Nikon D810, which is 36 megapixels. You can see the difference between the Fujifilm GFX 50S at 50 megapixels. You can see how much more you get in this aspect of 4:3 instead of 3:2. But right now this doesn't look great, but let's go ahead and do a couple things. First thing is change the blending mode to overlay. Alright, that still looks pretty bad. Let's go ahead and move this up a little bit. Let's figure out where exactly we want this sky to be. Now obviously this is the horizon line from the sky replacement. Let me just go ahead and transform it a little bit. Let's do a little bit of scaling here. A little bit of scaling this direction. I'm just going to move it around until I kind of like the way and the area that we're using. Something like that, maybe a little taller, a little bit more this way. And that's starting to look pretty good as far as positioning goes. Let's leave it there for now. First thing, let's go ahead and create a mask. And what I'm going to do, that same technique of using part of the sky, blending it in from about here to here. Not quite. From here to here. All right, that's starting to look a little bit better. And what I can do, after I draw this mask, I can always scale it, but I want to get it as right as possible first. And I do want to cut into the city just a little bit. So that's starting to look all right. We'll go ahead and unlink this mask for now. And I'll also change the opacity here. And I think we'll change that. We'll just start pulling it down a little bit. It shouldn't be too intense. Maybe about 76%. Let's just go ahead and make that sort of a rounded number there. Now at this point what I can do is move the sky independently of the mask. So we don't want to keep any of that. Let's go ahead and scale it up a little bit more. And move it. So see this area on this side? I'm trying to lose all of that, but keep most of this hotspot on the right. Now, the nice thing about this sky So the sun position from this sky is relatively in the same position as the sun was in New York City. In other words, it's so far off to the right side that it's casting light in the correct direction. Let's go ahead and tweak this a little bit more. Somewhere between 75 and 80%. Let's just make it an even 80. And now with the mask selected, I'll go ahead and change some of this mask here. So we'll go ahead and pull that down a little bit and move it up just by nudging it. That's starting to look pretty good. If I zoom in a little bit here, I'm pretty happy with the way that this looks, this color, but we have some issues. Now, if this was set to normal, you can see that it would be much more difficult to mask and that opacity doesn't look very good. But with overlay, it tends to look pretty nice. It's a hot sky because it is just past sunset, so that looks pretty natural. But we are overlaying that over the buildings themselves. Now, obviously, like a lot of the architecture in Dubai, these are very linear objects, but they also have some transparency. So this has a lot of transparency. This tower has a ton of transparency. This doesn't have a lot of transparency, but it does have a lot of little fine edges that we'd have to work around. So instead of drawing a mask, what I want to do is try to create a high contrast mask that we can use to help build and subtract these elements from the sky. And I'm going to do that using, once again, the late afternoon image. So we're going to go ahead and duplicate this, move it to the top, just go ahead and delete the mask and set it to normal. Let's go to the channels and we'll just take a look at red, green, and blue. They're all very similar. So I'm going to select RGB and I'm going to create a new channel. Now you can see if I deselect, the sky is mostly white. So let's go ahead and use Command M for curves. What I'm going to do is clamp this. And now if you can see, I don't know if you can see that edge right here that I'm following, that edge of gray. I'm trying to move that edge of gray past the Empire State, about there. Then what I can do is clamp it down this way as well, a little bit darker, just like that. And what I can do after that is grab the brush tool and just kind of clean up this other area where it's white here. And we'll just go ahead and fade a little bit of this back into itself. Really easy to do. Now the main thing that I was trying to achieve was to grab this transparency, and you can see I have that transparency selected, this transparency as well. Same thing with parts of this. So let's go ahead and back that up again, and I'm going to load this as a selection. Go back to layers, and what I'm going to do is delete the late afternoon layer. We've used that, and I'm going to drag this to a folder. And we'll go ahead and use that mask that we generated. And we'll take a look at this before and after. So you can see now with this sky, it doesn't exist on the architecture of the building itself, but it does exist between it, which is pretty cool. So we're able to use some of that color in the transparent parts of the building, and we're able to mask this out without having to do anything too complicated. So it works out really well. Let's go ahead and name this Sky Replacement. We'll name this Sky Mask. Save it in the background. Now that we have our blend and composite coming together, let's go ahead and take a look at some issues in the sky. We have a bunch of different things. We have some planes going by. We have some streaks. These could be parts of the cloud. Well, first thing, we have to identify where these come from. So first of all, they're not coming from this new sky. So are they coming from the late afternoon? No, because that doesn't affect the sky at all. Are they coming from the highlights layer? And yes, some of them are. You see that right here, that one. So what we want to do is actually go ahead and identify where these are coming from. We'll go ahead and mask out. First, just simply mask out the areas when we know we're having the problem. So we'll take a look at the highlights here. Now pay attention to these clouds. These clouds are an issue as well. I'm really looking at making sure that none of these streaks, like this here, is coming from that layer, and they're not. Okay. So the main issue here is when we start to use the light and blending mode, sometimes we get color addition. So here we have these darker clouds that are part of the base layer, but when we add this, you can see we're getting these pink clouds. I also don't want that, so we're going to go ahead and paint that out as well. Now remember, this isn't really adding anything to the sky, it's just giving us some negative color effects here. We'll just go ahead and pan over and do the same here. Same thing, we'll just go ahead and mask all that out, clean it up. Around here as well, and right on the horizon. I'm okay with the darker clouds, but the lighter clouds seem a little bit distracting. We'll just go ahead and shoot over here to the other side and make sure that we get them all. Make sure that there's nothing else there. That looks pretty good. I think that's it for the highlights layer. Next thing is cleaning up the sky itself. Create a new layer for this, call it Clean Up. And let's see if we can use the heel brush to get rid of some of this. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Got rid of that. Let's go ahead and see if we can get rid of some of these smaller things here. Yeah, heel brush works really well for these things. Let's see if we can zap out some of the big ones first. Let's see if we can get this. Not bad, not bad. Almost, wow, it's doing a really good job. That's great. All right, just these little things now. Pan over, get rid of anything distracting. And let's see if we can get rid of this too. That doesn't look very good. Let's switch to the clone brush and use a very low flow. Let's just go ahead and take it from about here and just go ahead and paint some in. Just hide it a little bit. Small brushes, small brush strokes. That looks pretty good. Nice. So what we have here is a blend of a few skies. So there could be some things lying underneath, and there could be some things that are sort of happening with the new sky. And now we've kind of created a combination of them. So sometimes it's good to just go in and clean some of this up, soften it up. And now is the time as well. I also should point out that with the sky mask that we put in, you can see when I turn it off what happens here. So pretty much before you do the cleanup layer, you have to make sure that you commit to the settings that you want. In other words, is this going to be as opaque as I've set it? If I'm going to change it, I need to change it right away, or else repaint all of these cleanup edges here, all of these little pixels that we're removing. Looks like we've pretty much taken care of the sky. Let's zoom out a little bit and take a look. Let's go ahead and select everything, Command G. We'll call this Blend. Let's make a duplicate of the blend. Shift, Option, Command E. Make a new layer out of everything active, and we'll go ahead and marry this stuff together with ACRF, Adobe Camera Raw Filter. Go back to the Camera Raw Filter. First thing, I started with a really dark palette. You guys remember right out of Lightroom we didn't make too many adjustments, so let's pull the exposure up maybe a quarter stop. And let's adjust the highlights to compensate. Let's pull those highlights back down an equal amount. And what I really want to focus on is selections just for the city and just for the sky. So let's start with the city itself. We'll go about here to here, right about the top of the horizon, and reset correction settings. You know what? Let's go ahead and bring that exposure up another quarter stop. So that's going to be total half stop in the buildings themselves. Let's go ahead and do the same thing in the shadows at about 25, and that's going to pop those details out tremendously. Well, let's go ahead and also adjust this a little bit so it moves down just a little bit more. Let's create a new one just for the sky, about here to here, give or take. And we'll reset this one. Let's go ahead and give the sky some more detail here and some more contrast using the dehaze. You can see that brings it back, makes it a little bit more dramatic at the top, and you can see I can change this mask just a little bit so we get a little bit of that red and the dehaze as well. Just be really careful just to make this just right. And to compensate, let's pull the shadows up. I don't want to darken the buildings too much, so we'll give that a 50 in the shadows. I think that all looks pretty good. Let's apply it by clicking OK. All right, so things are looking pretty good. Adobe Camera Raw Filter is really nice. We brought the shadows back. Now I want to do some luminosity masking. Now remember from the last lesson, I walked you through how to create your own custom actions. I want to take that one step further to create a few more. So we already created, remember, the luminosity masks and shadows, highlights, midtones. And we also created one that applies those luminosity masks directly to the folders. So let's make sure that this works again. It's been at least a day. Let's go ahead and play this one. And you can see in the channels, I'll have highlights, shadows, and midtones. Well, remember, when we're doing color correction or image blending, exposure blending, things like that, sometimes we need highlights 1, 2, and 3, or super highlights, or we need shadows 1, 2, and 3, or the super shadows. So let's create 2 more custom actions. Let's create 1 more custom action for just the highlights and 1 more for the shadows. So remember, in order to create a new action, create the new action button right here, and we'll go ahead and name it. So it's going to be create super highlights. And I'll click record. Now everything that I do is going to be applied to this again. So I created these already. I have highlights, shadows, and midtones. So what I'm going to want to do is select highlights 1, intersect it, go up to select, save selection, and we'll name it highlights 2. Click OK. Now, I'll go ahead and load highlights 2 again. Even though it already is loaded, we'll intersect it one more time. One more time to select, save selection, highlights 3. And I'll say OK. Last thing I want to do is Command D for deselect, and we'll stop this one. We'll go ahead and pack it up here. I'll go ahead and delete these really quickly. So we have highlights 2 and 3, and we'll create super highlights. I'll hit play, and that works perfectly. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and create one here. We'll say create super shadows, and I'll hit record. Now this time, I'm going to go ahead and load shadows, and we'll intersect the shadows, select, save selection, shadows 2. Load shadows 2, intersect it, select, save selection, and we'll call this shadows 3. Again, deselect, and that's going to be in the action 2, and we'll go ahead and stop recording. And now I'll go ahead and delete everything here. Let's delete them all. Let's go ahead and delete everything. So we'll make sure, we know we need to have one created before the other, so create luminosity masks. Perfect. Create super highlights. Create super shadows. Done. Nice. So now, you guys have created these actions. You can create different combinations. You can create shadows 2 and 3, 4, 5, and 6. You can create another action that deletes all of the luminosity masks that you've created. That works too. So it's really up to you. You'll find that you'll start using the action panel for things that you do most. So if you find yourself creating midtone masks with curves adjustments, specific curves adjustments, you can lock those in and then hit play. You can even bind these to different hotkeys, and you can toggle the hotkeys and run these actions anytime you want. Now that we've created these, let's go ahead and use one. I'm going to use shadows 3. I'll go back to layers, and I'll create a mask for this group called shadows 3. Now if we really take a look at this, look at the shadows 1, and I can move this right above, shadows 1, shadows 2, and shadows 3. You can see that that really pulls out the highlights, gets rid of the highlights. That's the one I want to use for this. The first thing I want to do is add contrast in those shadows. So what I did is I lifted that contrast up. I lifted the gamma when I was in Adobe Camera Raw Filter. We actually brought those values up. So what I want to do is add some contrast back in it. So we'll actually just add brightness and contrast, and we'll add 25% contrast. Toggle that on and off. And you can see that that's putting that contrast back there. And you can see there's a little bit in the sky. It's adding a little bit of contrast in the blue, which is great, but it's leaving these highlights all by themselves. Let's go ahead and add a new layer. Let's use hue and saturation. Well, what I want to do is neutralize the blues in the shadows, and I know that that selection actually incorporates most of the blues. So with the blues, we can go ahead and expand it just a little bit, and I'll pull the lightness way down. And you can see, don't pay attention to the sky, but lower on the image itself, about 70 to 75%. You can see if I toggle this on and off, this blue is going away. That's probably a little too strong. Let's make it 70. And let's also use a gradient here and have it mask out from about here to here. So we still get the blue reflection from the sky, but I'm able to quickly neutralize the blues in the foreground. Let's name these. We'll name this contrast and blue reduction. Something else I like to do here, if I zoom in and I feel that those colors are becoming a little flat, and you can see that the blue looks nice, we have to remove some of it, but if they're becoming a little bit flat, we can actually double this up by using a photo filter. And if I use a photo filter, just a warming filter, and link it to the blue reduction, you can see if we zoom in here a little bit more, it will make that color seem a little bit more natural. So if I change this and modify this, I pull this up, you can see we're actually adding the warmth back in to those pixels. So instead of the full blue reduction, we actually get a little bit more neutralizing, but it puts warmth back in it. So rather than stripping all the color away, we put a little bit of the color back as well. So we'll call this warming. Color corrections are looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and apply some sharpening. I'm going to use the high pass filter for that. Since this is 36 megapixels, let's stick with 3 and use overlay. The mask I want to use for this is going to be fairly straightforward. It's going to go from about here and stop on the horizon. If I zoom in, we can really see that taking effect here, before and after, chiseling out those details. So we'll call this high pass 3.0. Next thing is the noise reduction. Let's go ahead and zoom in here. You can see we have a little bit of noise, not too much, not as bad as I thought it was going to be, even with the blending of the sky. But even still, let's go ahead and duplicate this with Command J. We'll call this noise reduction. And we'll go back up to the camera raw filter. Let's zoom this in right around the Empire State. And we'll go and start changing this until we see the effect take place. And actually right around 40, yeah, 40, it looks pretty good. Let's pull some of the detail back. And I'll click OK. I'm going to use the same trick that we used to isolate the sky to use on the noise reduction. So the first thing is, let's add it to a folder here. Now the noise reduction, we know we want the noise reduction to end at a certain point, so we'll create that mask first. So we know we want it about here to here. That's a definite. But on top of this noise reduction, we'll go back to the mask that we've already created, sky mask, and we'll take a look at it. Well, right now, it already is a selection for the sky and it knocks out the building. So in this case, we can actually simply load the sky mask, go to the noise reduction, and add this right on top. So now it's really nice. So we will get that noise reduction, but it will be masked out on these parts of the building. So yeah, will it be softly applied to the building? Yes. But will it be 100% applied to the building? No. So this is a very powerful way to reuse the same mask for the noise reduction. Let's head back to Lightroom really quick. What I want to do is take the original blue hour shot, and I'm not going to hit reset because that's going to reset the distortion removal, but I will remove this. So it's back to default for the adjustments. And let's bring this in so we can examine the result. I'll export with previous, use unique names. And we'll just bring this in the same way we have been doing things. We'll bring it right here. Put it right on the bottom. And remember, when you open the PSD, everything will be exactly the same. We'll call this original raw file, or just original raw. All right, so it's time to take a look at everything that we've done so far. Let me just go ahead and walk you through the steps that we took. We had the adjusted blue hour, which was a really simple adjustment, and then we brought in the highlights from the blue hour in the late afternoon to pop up the details, and we did a complete sky replacement. From there, we made some minor adjustments to Adobe Camera Raw, noise reduction, high pass filter, and some tweaking in the super shadows. So that, from the beginning, we started straight out of the camera, original raw, with some minor distortion reduction look like this, and we went from here to here. Now that is looking like an awesome shot. Throughout the duration of photographing the world, you've seen that we've been able to solve the distortion issues, but in this case, when you want to dramatically shift the horizon line up or down and bypass the distortion, there's nothing quite like a tilt-shift lens. Next time I see you guys, we'll be back in the field in New York City on the Brooklyn side, where we're going to be attempting to create one massive panoramic image.